Rain hammered the slate roofs of Boston's old money district, turning the city's grandest cemetery into a gray sea of umbrellas. Rows of black cars lined the gates, license plates marked with the emblems of Harvard, the General Medical Association, the Massachusetts Bar. But the only thing colder than the November air was the mood surrounding Grace Tran. She stood a step apart from the family cluster at her father's gravesite, shoulders tense in a borrowed black coat, rain flattening her long hair. Her mother, Dr. Helen Lee, was perfect as ever. Flawless black dress, face unreadable beneath the brim of her expensive hat. Next to her stood Marcus, Grace's half-brother, the family's golden child, tall and confident in his tailored suit. The eulogy was already over. Grace had not been invited to speak. A hush fell as the priest handed the microphone to Dr. Lee. She didn't cry. Instead, she spoke of sacrifice and legacy, of the Lee family's decades of service to Boston's elite, of a great man whose children will carry on his work. She never once looked at Grace. When the priest nodded at her, Grace took a breath and stepped forward. The air shifted. People looked away, unsure if she was supposed to be there. But Grace's voice was clear, trembling with grief and defiance. "Pa, I know you tried to protect me. I wish I'd had one more day to thank you for—" She got no further. Her mother's hand shot out, seizing her arm with shocking force. "That's enough, Grace," Dr. Lee said, voice like ice. "Today is not the day for your dramatics. Please respect your father and our family." Marcus stepped between them, smiling for the mourners, as he whispered, "Don't embarrass yourself any more than you already have, little sister." A wave of murmurs swept the crowd. Grace felt her face burn. She stared at her father's coffin, her only ally in this world now silenced forever. After the service, mourners filed through the family's receiving line, offering sympathy to Helen and Marcus. Some nodded politely at Grace, others ignored her completely. A few older women whispered, "Isn't that the daughter from his first marriage? I heard she got in trouble at medical school." Grace clenched her jaw, refusing to flinch. She remembered every late night studying, every round in the ER, the sense of pride her father once had in her. All of it vanished the day her stepmother called the dean's office, and a single rumor, inappropriate behavior, unstable temperament, destroyed years of hard work. As the cemetery cleared, Marcus approached, holding a slim white envelope. "Dad wanted you to have this," he said. But when Grace reached for it, Helen snatched it away. "Absolutely not," Dr. Lee snapped. "You have no claim here. Your father made his wishes clear. Leave this family in peace, Grace. You've brought us nothing but shame." Before Grace could protest, Helen ripped the envelope in half and dropped the pieces into a muddy puddle. Marcus turned his back, guiding his mother to the waiting limousine. Alone now, Grace knelt and scooped up the soggy scraps. She glimpsed her father's handwriting. "My dearest Grace, if you are reading this—" Before the ink bled away, she sat on the wet ground, numb and shivering, the future closing in around her. The family's lawyer, a man she'd known since childhood, approached quietly. "I'm sorry, Grace," he said. "Your father's will. There were last-minute changes. Everything goes to your mother and Marcus. You've been removed as a beneficiary." Grace's heart twisted. "That's not possible. He promised me. He left me the clinic, at least." The lawyer's eyes darted away. "There was pressure. I wish it could have been different." As the sky darkened and mourners faded away, Grace realized she was alone. No money, no family, no place to go. The last to leave was Mrs. Fan, her late grandmother's oldest friend. The tiny woman pressed a warm hand over Grace's, slipping a crumpled note into her palm. "You are your father's daughter, Gracie," she whispered in Vietnamese. "Don't let them bury your voice." That night, Grace wandered the city's old streets, the note tight in her fist. It was her father's writing, saved from an earlier letter. "If they ever turn you out, remember, no one can steal your heart or your mind. Your story isn't finished." Rain lashed the windows as Grace slept in a rented room, pain and rage battling for space in her chest. Her father was gone. Her future, wrenched from her hands by those who were supposed to protect her, was now just a blank page. But in the silence, something fierce took root. They had stripped her of everything, except her will to fight. 2 years earlier, Grace Tran's life had been everything her father hoped. A top medical student at Harvard, a coveted intern rotation at Boston General, glowing recommendations from her professors. In the small, tight-knit Vietnamese-Chinese community, she was a source of pride. Proof that sacrifice and hard work could crack even the oldest, coldest ceilings. But it was never enough for Dr. Helen Lee. Grace still remembered the moment her mother appeared in the dean's office. She had just finished a 20-hour shift in the trauma ward. Her mind foggy, but her heart electric with purpose. She'd saved a child's life that night, her hands steady while a senior surgeon froze. The dean looked up as Helen Lee entered, her heels clicking, her voice sweet as honey. "Grace, darling, I thought it best to discuss this in person." Grace frowned, wary. "Discuss what?" Helen sat, crossing her legs elegantly. "There have been concerns about your behavior, Grace. You've missed rounds. You've argued with senior staff. And there are rumors, late-night outbursts, emotional instability. Not the conduct expected of a Lee family member." Grace stared. "That's not true. I work harder than anyone. Ask Dr. Myers. He knows." The dean shook his head, sliding a folder across the desk. "We've received several complaints, Grace. Written statements. Some quite serious." Grace flipped through the file. They were lies. Fabricated patient notes, anonymous emails, even a doctored transcript, showing 2 failed exams she had never taken. She looked at her mother, suddenly understanding. "You did this. Why?" Helen's face never changed. "This family has a reputation to protect. I warned you not to show weakness, not to embarrass us with your little crusades for justice over tradition. We don't air our dirty laundry in public. If you cannot play by the rules, you will not play at all." The dean's verdict was swift and merciless. "We're placing you on academic suspension, effective immediately. If you wish to appeal, you may do so in writing. But, given the seriousness, I would advise taking some time to reflect." Grace felt the world shift beneath her. By the end of the week, her email was deactivated, her student ID revoked, her stipend gone. She packed her apartment in silence, watched as her half-brother Marcus posted a celebratory photo of his own med school acceptance on Instagram. She moved home, desperate for answers. But at the family dinner table, Helen presented her with a single choice. "You may work as a nurse at our clinic, under supervision. You will not see patients independently, nor will you question protocol. You will keep your head down, be grateful for what you're given, and never speak of this again. If you refuse, you will find yourself out on the street." Grace gritted her teeth, remembering her father's disappointment. He had always hoped for reconciliation, but the cancer returned too quickly. He spent his last months fading in a hospital bed, while Helen ran the clinic with an iron fist, Marcus preparing to step into the family legacy. Those days at the clinic were the worst of Grace's life. Every mistake, every hesitation, was met with public correction. Helen paraded Grace in front of wealthy patients as an example of humility, the brilliant daughter brought low. Staff whispered about her, some pitying, most fearful. Marcus mocked her constantly, his own rise secured by their mother's favor. But Grace endured. She worked double shifts, picking up extra hours at a nearby nursing home. She still dreamed of saving lives, of going back to school, but every scholarship, every application, disappeared after one phone call from her mother. Her references vanished. Letters of recommendation never arrived. Sometimes late at night she read her father's old texts, messages he'd sent from the hospital. "Keep going, Gongai. No one can take your knowledge from you. I'm proud of you. Always." His belief was all that kept her afloat. Then, just as the pain began to harden into resolve, her father died. The family closed ranks. Helen froze her accounts, and Marcus accused her of stealing prescription pads from the clinic, reporting her to the state board. Within days, Grace was officially barred from working in any medical capacity in Boston. The humiliation was public and absolute. She stood on the curb with a box of clothes and a faded photograph, watching as the only home she'd ever known locked its doors behind her. No friends called. No colleagues dared reach out. At the city's edge, she rented a basement room with the last of her savings and took the only jobs available: cleaning hospital rooms on the night shift, temping at a pharmacy, helping elderly neighbors with groceries. But as she trudged through each endless day, a new fire took hold. Helen and Marcus had stolen her dreams, but they had not broken her mind or her heart. And Grace vowed, as she stared at the city lights from her tiny window, "You may own the hospital, but you don't own the truth." For the first time in her life, Grace was utterly alone. Her phone, once alive with group chats and work notifications, was eerily silent. Friends from med school stopped responding. Former professors avoided her at the grocery store. Even her old piano teacher, once a surrogate aunt, offered only a strained smile and averted eyes. Shame stuck to her like a second skin. Helen's reach was long, and her cruelty precise. In Chinatown, rumors spread faster than news. She stole from her own family clinic. She was never as smart as her brother anyway. Too sensitive. Too Americanized. Maybe she snapped after her father died. At the Buddhist temple, where Grace had once sung in the youth choir, parents murmured that she was a bad influence. Her childhood best friend, Lynn, returned her calls only to ask her not to show up at community events for a while. Everywhere she went, eyes slid away from her. She was a cautionary tale, a living warning. Even the privileged could fall, and the community would look away when they did. Her only anchor was her grandmother, Ba Nguai, living in a cramped senior apartment in Dorchester. On Friday nights, Grace would bring groceries and scrub the kitchen, while her grandmother scolded her for being too skinny and pressed red envelopes into her palm. "You are still my chow," Ba whispered, voice thin with age but fierce with pride. "What your mother does is her karma. You do not let them turn your heart cold." But Ba was old, and Grace couldn't burden her with everything. The two clung to each other, survivors on a shrinking island. Meanwhile, Marcus made sure Grace's humiliation was complete. He posted photos of his new white coat ceremony, his name on the hospital directory, cheerful family dinners, always with Helen smiling, always with an empty chair where Grace once sat. So proud of our legacy. Family. First, the captions read. Grace gritted her teeth and scrolled on. To survive, she worked nights at a downtown hospital. Not as a doctor, not even as a nurse, but cleaning operating rooms, wheeling patients, emptying biohazard bins. The pay barely covered rent. She kept her head down, said little, and tried not to flinch when someone recognized her name on her badge. But it was in these midnight corridors that Grace learned a new kind of medicine. The quiet kindness of overworked aides. The dignity of janitors who had seen everything and kept their own silent counsel. The pain of patients who fell through the cracks of the system her family profited from. She comforted the dying, smuggled extra pudding cups to the lonely, and listened to stories the doctors never bothered to hear. She learned how many people feared her mother's clinic, how they dreaded the way patients like us were hurried out the door or billed for tests they never needed. She learned about old debts, botched diagnoses, prescriptions written to please insurance companies, not heal the sick. It was an invisible river of suffering, one her family had damned for decades. Sometimes, in the small hours of the morning, Grace found herself at the hospital window, staring out over the city lights. She remembered her father's words. No one can take your knowledge from you. Her mother and Marcos might have destroyed her name, but not her mind. And with every injustice she witnessed, her anger grew sharper. One day, after a double shift, Grace was stopped on the sidewalk by a well-dressed woman she recognized from Temple. "My husband says you're working at City General. Please," the woman whispered, eyes darting. "Don't tell anyone about his treatments. We owe your mother too much already." Grace shook her head, sickened. "I'm just trying to do my job." But the encounter left her with a question that would haunt her. How many secrets was her family hiding? And who was paying the price? Late that night, her phone buzzed. A number she didn't know. A single text arrived. "You don't belong here. Go home, or you'll regret it." Grace stared at the screen, fingers cold. She deleted the message, but its poison lingered. She might be alone, shamed, and exiled. But she was not finished. In the darkness of her tiny room, she started a journal. Not of her failures, but of every wrong she'd witnessed, every patient overlooked, every whispered fear. She didn't know it yet, but her revenge had already begun. Grace's world narrowed to a handful of city blocks, a battered prepaid phone, and the worn uniform she cycled through laundromats at midnight. By day, she scrubbed operating rooms and wheeled patients through the bowels of City General. By night, she picked up shifts as a temp at the pharmacy, sometimes cleaning offices, sometimes stocking shelves in all-night groceries for cash under the table. She sent whatever money she could to her grandmother, knowing Ba wouldn't accept charity if she knew the truth. At first, Grace tried to stay invisible. Just another tired face in a crowd of immigrants and hustlers, making ends meet. But she couldn't stop noticing things. Habits of a doctor's daughter. She saw the bruises hidden by long sleeves, the tremor in the hands of an elderly janitor whose meds had been switched at the last refill. She heard the coughs that didn't heal, the fear in the eyes of single mothers who missed checkups to buy groceries. Every shift, she scribbled notes on a wrinkled notepad. Names, symptoms, stories. Some nights, she worked alongside Manuel, a Mexican-American man with a sharp wit and a limp from an old construction injury. They became unlikely friends, sharing cheap takeout and stories. Manuel told her about his cousin, who died from untreated diabetes after being dropped by the Lee family's charity clinic for lack of insurance. They just said, "Go to the ER if it gets worse." By then it was too late, Manuel said, voice hollow. Grace kept her rage to herself, but each story fanned the embers. She started spending time at the local free clinic, translating forms and filling in as an unofficial nurse when volunteers were short. There she met Mrs. Howard, an elderly black woman whose son had overdosed after being denied pain management by the Lee Clinic's doctors. They said it was policy, Mrs. Howard told her, voice trembling. But for some folks, that just means we don't care about people like you. For every injustice, Grace added a new page to her secret journal. Patterns emerged. Patients billed for services never received, tests ordered for profit, medical records mysteriously altered. A nurse at the free clinic, Jessie, confided that she'd once tried to report the Lee family's practices to the hospital board, only to be fired the next week for incompetence. Your mother has friends everywhere, Grace, Jessie warned. But one day, all this is going to come back on her. People remember. One evening, as Grace restocked shelves at the pharmacy, she overheard a customer, a young mother, pleading with the pharmacist for a cheaper asthma inhaler. "The insurance denied it again," the mother whispered, shame coloring her voice. "Dr. Lee said it's not her problem if I can't pay." The pharmacist shrugged, helpless. Grace quietly slipped a sample inhaler into the woman's bag. It was a small rebellion, but it gave her a taste of agency she hadn't felt in months. But the toll was heavy. Grace's hands ached, her feet blistered. Some nights she fell asleep in her uniform, too exhausted to cry. She dreamed of her old life, the click of a stethoscope, the weight of a textbook, her father's gentle pride. And yet, even in the depths, she found slivers of dignity. An old Vietnamese patient recognized her one night and pressed a steamed bun into her hand, whispering, "Chong Wan, Tung Ba Kwok." A Somali nurse taught her how to wrap her hair for long shifts. Manuel patched her bike for free. Slowly, the layers of humiliation began to harden into armor. Grace stopped waiting for rescue, stopped hoping for a miracle. Instead, she learned the names of every janitor, every aide, every security guard. She listened, she learned, and she remembered. Then, one rainy night, she was called to clean an isolation room where a patient had just died. Inside, she found an old woman, alone, clutching a faded photograph. On the back, a name, Mrs. Evelyn Wu, patient at Lee Clinic, 2015-2017. Grace froze. She remembered Mrs. Wu, her sweet laughter, her faith in herbal teas, her fear of the doctors. Grace had been a student then, but Mrs. Wu's charts had disappeared from the clinic right after her sudden transfer to hospice. Now, standing by the old woman's empty bed, Grace felt something shift. How many more Evelyn Wus had disappeared from her mother's world, their suffering erased by money and connections? She wrote the name in her journal, a vow burning in her heart. Grace might be at the bottom, but she was not done. The system that had broken her, and so many others, would face her one day. And when that day came, she would be ready. The call came on a bleak Tuesday, just before dawn. Grace was mopping the hallway near the hospice wing when the night charge nurse, a kindly man named Greg, tapped her shoulder. "There's a patient asking for you, Grace. Mrs. Chen in room 217. She said you helped her with her meds last week." Grace wiped her hands, heart heavy. Mrs. Chen was a regular at the free clinic, an elderly widow, always in and out with vague pains, prescription mix-ups, and a shy smile for anyone who spoke Mandarin. Grace had spent long afternoons helping her navigate paperwork, sometimes translating insurance denials, and sometimes just listening to stories about Mrs. Chen's life in Guangzhou. She entered the room quietly. The machines hummed, casting pale blue light over the tiny, frail woman tucked beneath layers of hospital blankets. "Grace?" Mrs. Chen whispered, her voice little more than a breath. "I knew you would come." Grace squeezed her hand gently. "I'm here, Ba. What can I do?" Mrs. Chen smiled weakly. "Just listen, Chow." With slow, trembling words, she began to speak. Not of family in China or her memories of Boston, but of a day 3 years ago, when she'd been a patient at the Lee family clinic. "There was another woman in my room. Evelyn Wu. Very sick. The doctor said she needed an operation, but her son couldn't pay. They made her sign many papers. Then one day she was gone. The staff said she moved to hospice, but her son came crying. Said he couldn't find her. I never saw her again." Mrs. Chen paused, struggling for air. Grace offered a sip of water, listening closely. "She was afraid, Grace. Before she left, she gave me a little notebook. Said if anything happened, to find a girl who spoke for the poor at the clinic. I kept it, but I was afraid. Your mother is very powerful. She can make people disappear." A chill ran down Grace's spine. "Do you still have it?" Mrs. Chen nodded. With trembling hands, she gestured to the battered tote bag on the bedside table. Inside, Grace found a cloth-wrapped notebook, the pages soft with age. On the first page, in Evelyn Wu's neat handwriting, "If you are reading this, you already know the cost of silence. The Lee Clinic is not what it seems. There are people buried beneath its floor. Don't let them erase us. Follow the dates. Find the files. Do not trust anyone with the Lee name." Grace's breath caught in her throat. She thumbed through the pages. Lists of patient names, dates, procedures, and brief notes. Overcharged for blood work. Refused follow-up after insurance expired. Pressured into experimental surgery. Never saw her again. Mrs. Chen clung to Grace's hand, tears in her eyes. "I was afraid, but you are brave, like your father. I see him in you. Do what I could not." Grace squeezed back, her own eyes wet. "I promise, Ba, I won't let them bury the truth." Moments later, Mrs. Chen drifted into a peaceful sleep. She passed before sunrise, her hand still in Grace's, the notebook pressed tightly between their palms. Grace walked home as dawn broke, heart pounding, the city awakening around her. The weight of the notebook was heavy, proof, at last, that she wasn't crazy, that what she'd seen all these years was real. That morning, she called in sick to all her jobs. She sat at a small table, pages spread in front of her, highlighter and pen in hand. She mapped connections, compared names with her own secret journal, and cross-referenced dates with clinic news releases. Patterns emerged. Patients who challenged bills or treatments vanished from records. Those who couldn't pay were quietly removed, shuttled to underfunded nursing homes, or worse. Procedures marked as innovative were done on low-income or immigrant patients, then billed to insurance at triple rates. One name, Mr. Howard, matched the son of the woman she'd met at the free clinic. Another name, Anna Sanchez, had been a janitor at the Lee Clinic, suddenly fired after making trouble about a missing patient. Dozens of others lined the pages. Grace's hand shook as she realized this was bigger than a family feud. This was a system, a machine built on profit and power, grinding up the city's most vulnerable. Her family, her mother, and Marcus. They had all played a part. By the afternoon, Grace had made up her mind. She couldn't do this alone. She needed allies, protection, and a way to get these stories into the light. As she walked to the free clinic, notebook clutched in her pocket, Grace saw her mother's face on a billboard. Smiling, celebrated, a pillar of the community. The sight no longer filled her with longing, but with resolve. Mrs. Chen's last gift had set her on a path she could not turn back from. "I will not let you be erased," she whispered to the memory of Evelyn Wu and all the others. A reckoning was coming. The notebook never left Grace's side. It became her armor and her weapon, a lifeline to the truth she had always sensed beneath the spotless surfaces of her mother's empire. For days, she pored over every detail, the lists and codes in Evelyn Wu's shaky hand, the dates, initials, and cryptic notes. The more she studied, the more the edges of her old world began to crumble. Grace started at the Free Clinic's archives, searching through ancient file boxes in the musty back room. With Jessie's help, she cross-referenced the names from Evelyn's list with medical records and public death notices. Some files were gone, simply vanished from city databases. Others were marked transferred or expired without detail. Grace spent her nights online, diving into hospital obituaries, public health records, and where she could, insurance claims. A pattern emerged. Patients who challenged overbilling or unnecessary procedures soon transferred out or disappeared. Those who spoke little English or were undocumented suffered the most, coerced into signing medical waivers, charged for innovative therapies they didn't understand, then lost to the system. Lab results altered, surgeries performed with experimental devices, discharge notes with doctors' signatures that didn't match their handwriting. Some of the names on Evelyn's list matched hospital incident reports, unexpected complications, failure to follow up, even two flagged for possible medical error. In every case, the Lee Family Clinic issued press releases blaming the patient's non-compliance or pre-existing conditions. One file hit Grace like a punch. Mrs. Wu herself. Her original diagnosis was a minor one. Chronic anemia, manageable with medication and proper care. But the chart showed a sudden recommendation for an invasive surgery, signed by Marcus, just months after he joined the clinic. When Mrs. Wu's insurance lapsed, the records ended with a single word. Discharged. There was no hospice transfer, no explanation, just an empty space where her life should have been. Grace's hands trembled as she flipped through page after page of altered records. In the margins, Evelyn Wu had scribbled warnings. Follow the signatures. Compare dates. Some doctors don't know their names were used. Determined, Grace tracked down Dr. Olson, a retired physician whose name appeared on several experimental treatment forms. They met in a quiet cafe outside the city, where he confessed he'd never authorized those procedures. "I left that clinic after 1 year," he told her, voice heavy with regret. "Dr. Lee and her son started using my credentials without my consent. I reported it once. Next thing I knew, I was retired for health reasons." He slipped her a folder, copies of emails he'd sent to the medical board, all ignored. Emboldened, Grace reached out to Ana Sanchez, the former janitor who had been fired for making trouble. Ana, wary at first, eventually agreed to meet. She shared stories of medical waste being disposed of at odd hours, of staff told to keep quiet about patients who didn't make it, and of hush money offered to families in exchange for their silence. "It was always the poor ones, the immigrants," Ana said. "We were told it was just unlucky cases. But it kept happening. Each conversation pulled another thread from the family's tapestry of lies. Jessie at the Free Clinic helped Grace access an old hospital server. There, they found digital records with missing timestamps and strange file edits. Sometimes the day after a patient's death, always by someone with admin-level access. Most damning were the insurance billing codes, patients charged for procedures they never received. Test results duplicated to inflate claims, all funneled through shell companies linked to the Lee family's foundation. Grace documented everything, backing up files in hidden cloud accounts and USB drives she hid in her grandmother's apartment. The more she uncovered, the more she realized she couldn't go to the authorities yet. Her mother's reach extended into City Hall, hospital administration, even the press. But she knew she wasn't alone. Jessie, Anna, Dr. Olson, and Manuel all pledged to stand with her. "You're not crazy," Anna told her. "You're brave. You're what we need." One night, exhausted and shaken, Grace visited her father's grave, the city quiet around her. "I found it, Ba," she whispered. "It's worse than we thought. But I won't let them keep burying people. I promise." The first glimmer of hope sparked inside her. For the first time in years, she felt not just angry, but powerful. As dawn broke over Boston, Grace set her sights on the next step, building a network. She would need allies, and together, they would bring the whole rotten system into the light. Her family's secrets were no longer safe. Grace's days became a game of shadows. Work, research, then secret meetings that made her heart race with purpose and fear. She had never thought of herself as a leader, but something about desperation and the promise she made to Mrs. Chen and Evelyn Wu drove her forward, night after night. It started at the free clinic. Jessie, the nurse with fire in her eyes, brought in a young doctor named Dr. Theo Lin. Theo was barely 30, sharp as a scalpel, with a moral code as stubborn as Grace's own. He'd once interned at the Lee Clinic, but left after being pressured to falsify post-surgical reports. "They told me, this is how things are done here. Play along or find another job." So I left. Theo shook his head. "I've seen what happens to whistleblowers, but I'm tired of keeping my mouth shut." Together the four, Grace, Jessie, Anna, and Theo, became the core of an alliance. They met after hours in the clinic's back storage room, documents spread out across boxes of donated diapers and canned beans. They divided the workload. Jessie found more former staff willing to talk. Anna approached families of vanished patients. Theo used his hospital credentials to access medical databases, quietly piecing together a map of questionable deaths and altered records. Grace brought in Manuel, whose cousin's death had first opened her eyes to the cost of the system. Manuel, now working as a night security guard, connected them to other janitors and aides, people no one noticed, but who saw everything. As the network grew, Grace realized she needed legal protection. Theo introduced her to Ava Mitchell, a public interest lawyer known for her fearlessness against corrupt institutions. Ava listened in silence as Grace and Theo laid out the case. When they finished, she nodded, her jaw set. "This isn't just a malpractice suit. This is organized systemic abuse. You have enough for a class action and possibly criminal charges, if you can keep your witnesses safe." Ava explained the stakes. They would need airtight documentation, every record, every timeline, every name. They must protect whistleblowers' identities until the moment the case went public. The Lee family's lawyers would retaliate, threatening jobs, reputations, even immigration status. Grace took it all in, feeling both daunted and determined. "We do this by the book. No shortcuts, no anonymous leaks until we have backup. I promised my patients they wouldn't be erased. I intend to keep that promise. As weeks passed, their group swelled. Other nurses and aides joined quietly, some texting encrypted tips, some meeting only once, in a dark car or a church basement. Ava's legal team started prepping affidavits and creating a secure evidence vault. But the risks escalated. Jesse's car was vandalized. Manuel was followed home after a shift. Theo's hospital privileges were quietly downgraded. His chief of surgery, a Lee family friend, reassigned him to night ER shifts. Even Anna received a visit from a stern Foundation representative, warning her to let the past go. One evening, Grace's phone buzzed with a blocked number. She answered, voice calm. "You're making a mistake," a woman said, voice cool and familiar. "You're not built for this kind of war, Grace. Drop it now, and maybe we can make peace." Grace knew it was her mother. For a moment, the old fear clutched her chest. But then she pictured Mrs. Chen, Evelyn Wu, and every patient whose story filled her journal. "I'm not afraid anymore," Grace replied. "And I'm not alone." The line went dead. That night, Jesse called a meeting. "We're in deep now. If anyone wants out, say it. No shame." But nobody left. Instead, the team doubled down, backing up files in cloud vaults, connecting with journalists, preparing for the moment when everything would come to light. In the dim clinic storage room, Grace looked at the faces around her. Doctors, nurses, janitors, a lawyer, a security guard, all outcasts and fighters. She realized her revenge was no longer just for herself. It was for every voice silenced, every patient lost to greed and arrogance. As dawn crept over Boston, Grace and her allies swore an unspoken oath. No more silence, no more fear. The day of reckoning was coming. In the heart of winter, Boston was a city built for secrets. Fog hanging low, alleys swallowing footsteps, silence hovering at the edge of every story. But Grace and her allies were done with secrets. The group's momentum was unstoppable now. Grace, Theo, Jesse, Anna, and Ava spent their nights double-checking timelines, notarizing affidavits, and encrypting every file. The cloud vault was bursting. Scans of forged signatures, witness statements, billing codes, photos of bruises, security camera screenshots. Each piece, on its own, might have been dismissed. Together, they formed a damning mosaic. The last step was the most dangerous, going public. Ava arranged for a meeting with a team of investigative journalists at the Boston Globe. In a locked office after hours, Grace and Jesse laid out the evidence, voice recorders running. The lead reporter, a sharp-eyed woman named Mallory, listened intently as they described the scope. Dozens of deaths, hundreds of lives ruined, millions in fraudulent claims. "We'll need time to verify," Mallory warned, "and we can't guarantee protection if your names go on record." "We're not asking for protection," Grace replied. "We're asking for a spotlight. And if you don't run this, we'll find someone who will." The Globe assigned 2 reporters full-time to the investigation. Grace's network fielded calls day and night, confirming details, protecting whistleblowers, and making sure their stories matched under scrutiny. Jesse coordinated with patient families, preparing them for what might come: media storms, retaliation, old wounds reopened. Meanwhile, Ava filed anonymous complaints with the State Medical Board, the Department of Public Health, and multiple insurance companies. She launched a crowdfunding campaign for victims' legal support and set up encrypted hotlines for new tips. Theo's tech-savvy cousin built a website, Heal Boston Now, where anyone could submit their story, anonymously or not. The impact was immediate. Whispers raced through hospitals and clinics. Staff who'd once been silent reached out. Some with regret, others with relief. I knew about the lab results, but was told to stay quiet. My son died at that clinic. We thought it was just bad luck. Thank you for doing what none of us could. But the Lee family struck back harder than ever. Helen's PR machine painted Grace as a disturbed former student with a vendetta. Marcus appeared on local news, mourning the tragedy of misinformation harming their community trust. Threats poured in. Anonymous emails, calls to landlords warning to stay out of Lee family business. Jessie found a dead rat on her porch. Anna's brother was pulled over and threatened with deportation by a cop with clinic ties. Theo's car was keyed. Even Ava received thinly veiled threats in legalese. But the team held firm. Ava increased security, documenting every incident for the authorities. Mallory at the Globe published an early teaser. Medical malpractice and silence. Allegations haunt. Elite Boston clinic. The city buzzed. Anonymous donors boosted the victim's legal fund. Heal Boston now crashed under a wave of traffic. Then, just as pressure peaked, Mallory called. "We're running the full story next week. Front page. Are you ready?" Grace hesitated, heart thundering. She knew what it meant. No more hiding. No more hope for reconciliation. She thought of her father, her grandmother, the ghosts of Mrs. Chen and Evelyn Wu, of every patient who had been erased. "Yes," Grace said, "it's time." The morning the story broke, Grace's world exploded. Her photo ran on the front page, under the headline, "Systemic abuse and fraud at Lee Family Clinic. Whistleblowers speak out." TV crews camped outside her building. Messages from strangers flooded in. Some angry, most grateful. A few begging for help. The Attorney General's office called Ava to request evidence. Hospitals quietly reviewed staff with Lee family ties. Helen and Marcus went into damage control, threatening to sue everyone. Grace, the Globe, the Free Clinic, even the city. But the dam had burst. For the first time, the Lee family's power was not absolute. At the Free Clinic, patients greeted Grace with shy smiles, some hugging her, others simply whispering, "Thank you." Jessie's team doubled. Anna found a second job. Theo was quietly rehired at City General. And Grace, exhausted but unbroken, realized the truth was no longer hers alone. It belonged to everyone who'd ever been silenced. And everyone who refused to be silent anymore. The morning the story broke, the city didn't just wake up. Boston convulsed. Phones buzzed with headlines. News crews thronged outside the Lee family's imposing Beacon Hill brownstone. And Grace's photo was splashed across social media, lauded by some, vilified by others. The city's immigrant communities, once wary, now electrified, rallied around the whistleblowers. But within hours, Helen Lee made her countermove. The retaliation came swift and brutal. First, the lawsuits. By noon, Ava's legal inbox filled with cease and desist letters, threats of defamation claims, and subpoenas demanding the release of every email, call log, and witness name. Helen's legal team, a phalanx of Boston's best, filed restraining orders to keep Grace and her allies away from the Lee Clinic and all Lee Foundation property. The goal was clear: intimidate, overwhelm, and drain them dry. At the same time, Marcus took to TV and radio, his voice smooth, his grief rehearsed. "My sister is troubled. We love her, but she has a long history of mental health struggles. We're deeply saddened that private family pain has become a public spectacle. We only wish her peace and healing." With every interview, Marcus subtly rewrote the narrative. Grace as the unstable outcast, the alliance as opportunists, the claims as misunderstandings blown out of proportion. The family's influence infected every layer of Grace's life. Her landlord received a warning from a concerned neighbor about media risk. A week later, Grace found an eviction notice taped to her door. Jesse's daughter was bullied at school. Anna's brother was pulled into an ICE investigation. Ava mobilized legal contacts to intervene. Manuel's work hours were cut without explanation, his union boss suddenly tight-lipped. Even the free clinic was threatened with a city inspection for safety violations. But the most insidious attack was social. Anonymous posts smeared Grace's name across every major forum, alleging theft, addiction, fraud. Her med school records were leaked, but doctored to show failures she'd never had. Old friends ghosted her. Neighbors crossed the street when they saw her coming. Through it all, Grace held firm. She worked with Ava and the legal team, archiving every threat, every violation of whistleblower protection, every coincidental fire alarm at the clinic or suspicious car parked outside her new apartment. "We're not backing down," Ava told the group. "They want us to run scared, but we fight back. Every attack is more evidence for the feds." The support from the city's grassroots was stronger than ever. Donations to the legal fund soared. The Heal Boston Now website received stories from as far as California and Texas. Families with similar experiences at clinics run by other elite families. Jesse's team organized public rallies, and local churches opened their doors for support groups. But the battleground shifted to the courtroom. Helen and Marcus's lawyers filed a suit accusing Grace of libel, breach of confidentiality, even corporate sabotage. They subpoenaed her phone, demanded her emails, and attempted to freeze her small bank account. Ava countered with whistleblower protection motions, filed for injunctions, and dragged every retaliatory move into the public record. Blick. At the free clinic, Grace found a new purpose, teaching others how to document, to record, to protect themselves. She met with frightened workers after hours, reminding them that truth was their shield, if they stood together. "We knew they'd come for us," Jesse told her. "But if we're afraid now, what was the point of all our pain?" Still, some nights, the pressure nearly broke Grace. She lay awake, replaying every risk she'd forced on her friends, every threat to her grandmother's safety. She worried she had become the very thing her family claimed, a burden, a curse. But each time doubt crept in, someone from the community reached out, a grieving son, a patient who'd been denied care, a stranger sending a $10 bill with a note. "You gave us a voice." Then, a miracle. The state attorney general's office announced a formal investigation. The Globe ran a follow-up, detailing the family's intimidation campaign. TV pundits began to question the official story. For the first time, it was the Lee family on the defensive. Grace, battered but unbroken, stood ready. This was no longer a daughter's revenge. It was a movement for justice, one she refused to let die. The courthouse was packed from the first day. Television cameras crowded the steps, security was doubled, and the city's immigrant community lined the sidewalk with handmade signs. "Justice for patients. No more silence. We believe Grace," chanting in Vietnamese, Mandarin, Spanish, and English. Grace walked through the crowds each morning, shoulders square, face pale but resolute. Beside her, Ava and the Alliance stood as both shield and witness. Inside, the Lee family's legal army filled the defense side. Crisp suits, leather briefcases, faces tight with strategy. Helen sat at the center, a mask of mourning, her lawyer's hand covering hers, in performative comfort. Marcus wore his white coat for opening statements, a calculated move to remind the jury of his status and expertise. But his eyes flickered each time they met Grace's across the room. The judge, a stern woman known for her fairness, called the trial to order. What followed was a spectacle Boston would remember for decades. The prosecution laid out their case. Sworn affidavits from patients, staff, and medical experts, detailing the pattern of fraud and abuse. Evelyn Wu's notebook, authenticated and cross-referenced with digital records. Witnesses like Dr. Olson testifying to forged signatures and unauthorized procedures. Anna and Jesse explaining the cover-ups, the threats, the quiet disappearances. Grace took the stand on the second day. Her voice trembled at first, but grew stronger as she spoke. Of her years in med school, the moment her mother destroyed her future, the night Mrs. Chen placed the notebook in her hands. She named names, outlined every falsified chart, every insurance scam, every life lost to neglect or greed. When Helen's lawyer cross-examined her, they tried to break her composure. "You're clearly a bitter ex-student. Isn't this all a ploy for revenge? Isn't it true you were dismissed for incompetence? Why should the court believe you over your accomplished family?" Grace steadied her breath and answered each question with quiet authority. "My record speaks for itself. My only motive is justice. I loved my family, but I cannot love a lie. The evidence is right here. Ignore my words if you must, but you cannot ignore these names, these stories." One by one, the Alliance spoke. Theo described the pressure to lie. Jessie broke down as she read her notes from years ago. Patients lost, jobs lost, dignity stripped away. Anna faced Helen in court, voice shaking but clear, as she recounted being paid to keep quiet. Helen's defense was brutal. Her lawyers paraded experts who vouched for her exemplary leadership and Marcus's compassionate care. Marcus took the stand, painting Grace as unstable, her supporters as misled. He wept for the jury, telling of his own pain at watching his troubled sisters decline. But cracks appeared. The prosecution played a secretly recorded conversation. Marcus, angry at Grace, letting slip, "You were never meant to be part of this family's future." The room went still. A parade of patients and families testified to what had happened in the shadows. Children denied treatment, elders discharged without support, families threatened with lawsuits if they spoke up. A pattern was undeniable. The courtroom buzzed as each new witness took the stand. National media arrived. Legal blogs live-tweeted every moment. During recess, Helen approached Grace in a corridor, her mask briefly slipping. "You could have had everything. Why ruin us?" Grace met her eyes so familiar, once so warm. "You ruined yourself, me. I'm just telling the truth." Closing arguments gripped the city. Ava, her voice ringing with conviction, said, "Medicine is a sacred trust. These defendants traded trust for money, status, and fear." Grace lost everything, her name, her future, her family, so that others might have justice. She did not want revenge. She wanted the truth. The jury retired to deliberate. Outside, the city held its breath. Grace waited with her allies in a side room, hands shaking, Ava's arm around her shoulders. Jessie pressed her grandmother's red envelope into her hand. For luck. Manuel whispered, No matter what, you did what they never could. You made them see us. The verdict would decide more than just Grace's fate. It would decide whether silence or courage defined their community's future. As the jury filed back in, Grace rose to meet her destiny. Win or lose, she had spoken the truth. The city seemed to hold its breath as the jury returned. Every seat in the courtroom was filled. Patients holding hands, nurses in faded scrubs, immigrant elders from the temple, reporters scribbling every detail. Even the courthouse steps outside overflowed with crowds, watching a live stream on their phones, eyes glued to the fate of the Lee family and the woman who had dared to speak against them. Grace's heart pounded as the jury forewoman rose. The judge's voice, cool and even, cut through the tension. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." In a clear, unwavering voice, the forewoman began. "On the count of medical fraud, we find the defendants, Dr. Helen Lee and Dr. Marcus Lee, guilty. On the count of wrongful termination and witness intimidation, we find the defendants guilty. On the count of patient abuse and negligence, we find the defendants guilty. On the count of conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, we find the defendants guilty." The words washed over Grace, dizzying, overwhelming. Around her, her allies wept and embraced. Jessie buried her face in Manuel's shoulder. Anna clapped her hands to her mouth. Theo squeezed Grace's arm so hard it hurt. Ava, always poised, let her tears fall openly. Helen slumped in her seat, lips pressed tight, eyes flat with defeat. Marcus's face twisted with disbelief, his mask of sorrow finally cracking into bitterness. The judge's voice rang out. "Dr. Helen Lee and Dr. Marcus Lee, you are hereby stripped of all medical licenses and barred from practice pending criminal sentencing. The court orders restitution to all named victims and instructs the state attorney's office to pursue criminal charges as warranted by evidence." Outside, the city erupted. Applause thundered through the hallways as word spread. The crowd on the steps cheered, some openly sobbing, others chanting Grace's name. Cameras flashed as her allies emerged, no longer shadows, but faces of a movement. The media descended, but Grace's first words were not about herself. Standing before the cameras, she said, "This verdict is not just for me. It's for every patient who was silenced, every worker who lost their job for telling the truth, every family who felt powerless. My father taught me that our greatest duty is to care for one another. We will honor that now." As the city celebrated, the Attorney General announced a wider investigation into medical corruption. Other clinics across the state were named in new lawsuits. A victims' compensation fund, seeded with court-ordered restitution, was established by Ava and the Alliance. Families who had lived in fear for years stepped into the light, their stories finally heard. Grace's own vindication was both public and personal. Harvard sent a letter restoring her medical record and offering her a place in a returning student program. Hospital administrators, in an unprecedented move, issued a public apology for failing to protect patients and staff. Grace was flooded with job offers from clinics and hospitals across the country. But for Grace, the greatest reward was seeing the people she had fought for. The janitors, the single mothers, the elders, embrace their own power. At the temple, an entire wall was covered with thank you notes, written in every language of the neighborhood. At the free clinic, Jessie organized a celebration dinner, and Manuel presented Grace with a plaque. "To the doctor who healed our community's courage." Helen and Marcus's fall was swift. The Lee family's wealth and prestige evaporated under the glare of truth. Their once proud name became synonymous with betrayal, and for the first time, the community did not rally to their defense. That night, alone in her apartment, Grace allowed herself to grieve. She mourned her father, her stolen years, even the family she would never have again. But she also smiled through her tears, a deep, exhausted relief settling in her bones. She had not just survived. She had changed everything. The next morning, she donned her scrubs, not the white coat of privilege, but the colors of those who worked for every victory. As she walked out into the city sunlight, she knew her fight was not just for revenge, but for healing, and for the hope that no one else would have to do it alone. For the first time in years, Grace woke each morning without dread. The air in her small apartment, once so heavy with fear and longing, now shimmered with possibility. The city that had watched her fall now watched her rise, and, more importantly, watched itself begin to heal. Grace returned to medicine, but not to the marble halls or conference rooms where her family's name once ruled. Instead, she opened a modest clinic on the city's edge, a sunlit space painted with murals, staffed by many of the people who'd once been her underground allies. Jessie ran the nurse's desk. Anna organized community outreach. Theo juggled charts and free diabetes screenings with a dry sense of humor. Manuel and his union friends fixed up the building, planting gardens in every empty patch of dirt. Patients came from every neighborhood, every background. Single mothers, laborers, elders who spoke little English. Some simply wanted care without shame. Others brought their children, hoping they might see in Grace what was possible after heartbreak. She called her clinic the Lighthouse, the motto over the door, "No one is invisible here." The compensation fund, built on the ruins of the Lee fortune, helped hundreds pay medical bills and recover lost wages. Ava and her team trained a new generation of advocates, teaching them to spot corruption, to speak out, to stand together. But healing was not just about medicine or lawsuits. Grace started art nights and music classes, free yoga for overworked moms, storytelling circles for survivors. At Sunday potlucks, elders brought recipes from Vietnam, El Salvador, and Haiti, teaching the next generation to cook, to laugh, to remember where they came from. Grace's grandmother, frail but proud, became a beloved fixture, offering red envelopes, wise words, and the reminder that healing is also for the heart. "Your father would be proud," she said one evening, holding Grace's hand in the garden. "You brought us all home." Even the city's officials, once so eager to bow to power, now came to listen, to learn, to apologize. Grace used her voice to push for reforms, patient rights, language access, fair labor laws. She spoke at rallies, on radio, sometimes even on national TV, but always finished with the same promise. We are strongest when we fight for each other. That is how we heal. As the years passed, the impact of Grace's battle echoed beyond Boston. Clinics across the country modeled themselves on her lighthouse. Former adversaries sought her advice, and everywhere she went, someone stopped her with a quiet "thank you," not for vengeance, but for the courage to create something better from pain. Her family's name, once a wound, became simply part of her story. Helen and Marcus faded from public life, their empire gone, their control broken. Some wounds would never heal between them. Grace accepted that and let the rest go. On the anniversary of the verdict, the lighthouse held an open house. Hundreds came, old and young, speaking in many languages. Each one a thread in the tapestry Grace had woven from loss. Jessie made a speech about hope. Manuel led a toast. Anna's children presented Grace with a painting of the clinic's door, sun breaking through storm clouds. Grace, standing in the doorway as laughter spilled into the street, realized her sweetest revenge had never been about victory or punishment. It was the home she'd built from truth and love, the family she'd found in the light. She lifted her glass and said, "For everyone who thought they were invisible, you are seen, you are valued, and you are never alone." And in that moment, surrounded by all she had saved, and all she had become, Grace knew her father was right. No one could ever steal her heart or her mind. And her story at last was just beginning.